Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet wander through the pages of forgotten history. Tonight, we tread softly through the misty folds of time, into a shadowed corner of the past, where truth and legend are woven together so tightly that no blade of reason can separate them. Whether you are curled beneath blankets, sipping something warm, or letting the gentle stillness of night surround you, I invite you to come with me. Let the world beyond your door fade for now. Let the hush settle over your thoughts. Let the echoes begin. There is a place few maps remember, buried in the folds of northern England, near the borderlands, where moor meets forest and ruin meets root. Locals call it Black Hollow, though its true name was lost, long ago forgotten, even by those who once whispered it in prayer. It was a village once, long before the plague came, and before the bell tower was raised. What happened there, what was left behind, is a story rarely told aloud, and never after sunset. It began, as such tales often do, with a need. The people of Black Hollow were simple folk woodcutters, shepherds, and peat diggers, quiet and close to the land. Their chapel had no bell, and for years the priest would call his flock with a horn carved from stag bone. But when the old priest passed, and a new one came from York, things began to change. Father Durant was not like the men who had come before. He brought books, heavy and strange, bound in leathers the villagers did not recognize. He brought relics, two thin brittle bones wrapped in velvet, and candles that smoked with a scent like rust. He said prayers none could follow, in tongues no one had heard, but he spoke with kindness, and walked with calm, and the people, though uneasy, did not question him. It was he who insisted the chapel needed a proper bell, a great bronze one, forged not from scraps, but cast as one, a symbol of unity and reverence. He spoke of sound as sanctity, that a bell, once blessed, could drive away the things that walked between night and dream. The villagers gave what they could: coins, trinkets, old rings long buried in drawers. The blacksmith's son was sent to the city with a cart and a parchment sealed with wax. The bell arrived 3 months later, larger than expected, darker than it should have been. Its surface was rough, almost pitted, and along the lip were markings. The Latin the villagers had learned to fear, but something older, etched, not cast. And though no one could say who had written them, no one dared ask. When it first rang, something shifted. The birds that lived in the belfry never returned. The dogs whined and refused to go near the chapel. Milk curdled overnight. And old Marjorie, who had lived through 3 winters with her wits intact, began to speak in riddles and wander the woods at dusk. Still, Father Durant declared it a blessing, a sign of cleansing. He rang it every morning, every evening, and at midnight prayers. But the sound was not right. It was too deep, too full. It did not echo, it sank. It settled into the bones, heavy and slow. It made men pause in their work and forget what they had been doing. It made children cry without knowing why. And once, just once, it rang when no hand touched the rope. The villagers began to whisper. They avoided the chapel. When they could, they spoke less, stayed inside after dark. A stillness came upon Black Hollow, not of peace, but of waiting, as though the village held its breath. Then came the first disappearance. Thomas, the cooper's apprentice, was last seen leaving the chapel after dusk, having delivered new bindings for the psalter. He did not return. His mother searched all night, and in the morning the priest claimed he had been called to serve at the abbey in Durham. But no message ever came, no letter, no farewell. A week later, old Reed, the woodcutter, vanished in the same way. Then Elsbeth, who tended the lambs, on the eastern ridge, one by one, quietly, without trace. Still the bell rang. It rang in the mornings, and in the evenings, and in the hollow heart of night. Its sound, once simply unsettling, became unbearable. It was not music, it was mourning, and it never cracked or dulled. Even in frost, even in thunder, some began to say. It was not forged, but found, dug from beneath the earth, or pulled from the ruins of an older place, a relic not of God, but of something forgotten. They said it was not meant to be heard by the living dot. No one dared climb the belfry to silence it. No one dared speak against Father Durant, whose eyes no longer seemed to blink in daylight, whose shadow moved slightly wrong. But one night, the smith's Harlan, who had buried his daughter not a month before, wrapped his hands in linen, soaked in vinegar and ash, and said he would end it. He walked alone to the chapel, just before midnight. He carried no blade, only a hammer and a long rusted spike. He said if he could drive it through the yoke, the bell would fall and shatter. That morning, they found the chapel door still open, but Harlan was gone. The bell was still there, still whole, still hanging, still waiting, and it rang. It rang louder. There is a hollow in the land now, where no trees grow, and no birds fly overhead. The fog does not lift there, even in summer. No one speaks its name, though maps still mark it faintly, with a smudge and a crooked steeple. Some say the sound can still be heard on cold nights, if the wind comes down from the moors. A toll, low and long, like a breath held too long. But not all who hear it forget. Not all who listen turn away. Some remember, some follow it back, and some never leave. Let your thoughts settle there, in the misty stillness of Black Hollow. Let your breath fall gently, your eyes close slowly. For this is only the beginning. What lies above the belfry? What lies beneath it? We'll return soon to the chapel in the hollow, and when we do, the bell will toll again. Let us return now, dear listener, to the forgotten place where fog and silence dwell together, where memory lingers like breath on cold glass. Black Hollow waits for us, as it always does, not with open arms, but with stillness. With that hush that settles not only in the woods or the chapel's dust-filled corners, but deeper in the spaces between thought and sleep. When last we wandered those crooked paths, the bell had begun to toll with a will of its own, and those who once dared question its presence had already vanished. But still the village endured. Still the people carried on, as people often do, when fear becomes too heavy to hold in both hands. They simply set it down. They learned to walk around it. But not all things can be walked around forever. It was Ellen, the midwife, who first began to write it down. She had seen too much not to. Her hands had delivered too many stillborns that seasoned teeny limbs curled like seeds, eyes unopened, chests still. She had seen hens refuse to lay, cows give sour milk, bread refuse to rise, no matter how long it rested by the hearth. And each time the bell tolled, she felt something in her ribs turn cold, like a hand pressing gently against her heart. So she wrote. She kept a record in a worn leather book tucked beneath the floorboards of her cottage, a list of the lost names etched in careful ink: Thomas, Reed, Elsbeth, Harlan, and the dates the bell rang without a hand upon its rope. She made drawings, 2 of the symbols etched along the bell's lip, of the narrow gouges inside the chapel walls, clawed as if something had once tried to climb out. No one came to her for birthing anymore. No child had survived since the snow first fell. She told no one of the book, not even the tanner's wife, with whom she shared her supper most nights. She knew better than to speak what the hollow wished to forget. But still, her hands moved across the page, night after night, as if recording were a warding, as if the very act of noticing might hold back what waited in the bell tower's dark throat. One night early spring, when the moors were still skeletal and frost clung to the wind, she heard the bell, not ringing this time, but humming, low, rhythmic, a vibration, not sound. It passed through her cottage walls and into her bones, like the beat of a second heart. She followed it, no shoes, no lantern, only the hum and the cold and the silence that seemed to part for her as she walked. She did not remember leaving her bed, only that she was suddenly standing on the chapel steps, hands shaking, eyes lifted toward the tower's hollow crown. It was then she noticed it. The chapel's bell tower, once plain and worn, now bore a crack. Not in the stone, no. The stone remained unchanged, but in the air around it. A shimmer like heat above a fire, a ripple, a place where the world no longer held firm. She blinked, and it vanished. The next day, she found new pages in her book. She had no memory of writing them. The ink was hers, the language was not. It was from that point on that dreams began to twist. They came to many in the village wordless visions, flickering and cold, of drowning in dry wells, of roots pulling themselves from the earth like fingers, of bells ringing beneath water. The children began to wake crying, clutching their throats. One boy, barely 5, drew an image in charcoal of the tower, but upside down, its foundation in the sky, its spire buried beneath the soil. Ellen burned her book that week. She said she could feel it breathing when she touched it, yet still, the bell tolled. It rang once during the funeral of Widow Thorne, and though no hand moved the rope, the coffin split down the center as if struck. It rang again during the feast of St. Osric, and the stew turned black in its cauldron before it reached the table. And then, one gray dawn, it rang 3 times. That had never happened before. 3 rings, slow and deep, and then silence so thick it seemed to press against the chest like weight. Birds did not return that spring. The brook ran dry, though snow still melted on the highlands, and people stopped speaking of God. It was Marin who finally spoke aloud what others dared not. She was the oldest in the hollow, perhaps the oldest it had ever known. Skin like bark, eyes like smoke. She had seen the bell before it came. She had dreamed it. She remembered. They lied, she said, seated by her fire, as for villagers stood awkwardly around her. That bell was never meant for the chapel. It was buried once, long ago. Far below this place, deeper than roots dare grow. Her voice rasped like dry leaves. It was unearthed by hands that should not have dug. South of the forest, beneath the standing stone. No one knew which stone she meant. There were many. But something in her voice, slow, deliberate, heavy, made them all believe she did. She spoke of a circle, far from the village, hidden in the peat. Stones older than the abbey at York, older than the Roman roads. A place she'd been taken once, as a child, by her grandfather, who had wept when he saw it, who had warned her never to return. And beneath those stones, he'd whispered, lay something sealed, not by man, but by the earth itself. Something with a voice, but no mouth. Something that calls, not with sound, but with memory. They said she died the next night, though none could say when. They found her sitting in her chair, a smile fixed to her lips. Her eyes were open, her hands folded in prayer. But around her neck hung a pendant none had seen before. Bell no larger than a fingernail, carved from bone, and it rang once. Quietly, as they moved her body. Ellen did not attend the burial. Instead, she walked alone, silent out, past the far field, beyond the hedgerow, past the place where the path ends. She carried nothing, wore only her cloak, and a scarf the color of heather. Her face held no fear, only resolve. She found the stone at dusk. It was just as Marin had said, gray and lichen-covered, leaning slightly west. Around it, a ring of smaller stones barely broke the soil. The earth smelled old, metallic. The wind was still. She knelt and she listened, not for the bell, this time, for what waited beneath it, and the earth answered, let your thoughts settle now, not in fear, but in wonder. Let your breath match the slow rhythm of the wind among the stones. For the story does not end here. The bell has rung again, and what lies beneath is no longer content to sleep. We will return soon to the hollow, to the chapel, and to the stone that marks the edge of silence. And when we do, something beneath the soil will stir. Dear listener, the night still holds, and the fog outside our window has not yet lifted. You are safe, here wrapped in softness, surrounded by silence, letting the hush of history guide you gently toward sleep. Tonight, the story continues, unbroken like the tolling of a bell through heavy mist. When last we walked the winding path to Black Hollow, Ellen had followed the ancient whisper out past the edge of all familiar places. She had knelt by a stone that no one had spoken of in generations, and she had heard something answer. But the land does not speak with words, not anymore. It speaks through dreams, through shifts in weather, through bones found where no bones should lie. The morning after Ellen vanished into the moor, the fog did not lift, not at dawn, not by noon. The sun rose, but the light it gave was pale and directionless, like the glow of a lamp beneath thick cloth. No shadows fell. The birds that had begun to return in spring were silent again, and the villagers awoke with aching limbs and restless hearts, their dreams still clinging like spider silk. None had seen Ellen since the night before. A few brave souls, 5 in total, gathered near the edge of the village. Among them was Oran, the tanner's brother, whose left eye had wept blood since the last tolling, and Ulrich, who had once served in the wars to the east, and who no longer slept at all. They followed her trail past the hedgerow, and out to where the land grew strange. The trees there twisted differently. Their trunks turned not toward light, but away from it, as if something beneath the soil called them downward. The stone stood where Marin had said it would, tilted, weather-worn, half swallowed by moss and time. But around it now, the ground had changed. The ring of smaller stones had sunk into the peat, forming a shallow depression. At its center, a hole had opened, narrow, not natural. A shaft, carved not by water or time, but by hand, or something else. There were no tracks, no blood, no sign of struggle. Only the fog, and a faint smell like burnt iron and lavender. They did not go in, they returned in silence, and no one asked what they had seen that night. The bell rang once more. But this time, it sang. It was not a toll, but a rising, swelling sound, long and deep and unbearably sweet, like a choir sung in reverse. It echoed not from the tower, but from beneath the chapel floor. And when it faded, several in the village wept without, knowing why something had changed. Elsewhere, beyond Black Hollow's forgotten roads, a scholar named Bram received a letter. He lived alone in a crumbling estate 3 ridges east, where books outnumbered windows and dust hung in thick tapestries from every shelf. The letter came unsigned, sealed in pitch-black wax without crest or mark. Inside only a single sentence, written in perfect script. The bell that sings now tolls for the living. It should have made no sense. But Bram, whose studies had led him through the buried vaults of abbeys long since turned to ash, understood. He had read of such bells before. Not many knew the lore, even fewer dared speak it, but he had found references buried in marginalia, footnotes that scholars had scrawled and then crossed out. Whispers of bells not forged by man, but grown. Bells that held voices, that fed on memory, that once told not to summon the faithful, but to wake the forgotten. He packed his satchel before dawn. As Bram rode west through the folding hills, the land grew quieter. Villages thinned, birds scattered. The trees grew sparse, yet their branches curved downward, like arms bent in reverence or warning. By the second night, he could hear the bell even from miles away, not as sound, but as pressure. A weight behind the eyes, a knowing that settled into the marrow. When he reached Black Hollow, no one greeted him. No carts moved, no doors opened. The village was not empty, but it felt paused, as if the people still lived, but lived beneath a great glass dome, and had forgotten the way out. Bram walked slowly through the square. Smoke rose from chimneys, yet no footsteps echoed on stone. He passed the old cooper's shop, its windows dark. Past the tavern, where mugs sat half-drunk beside hearths gone cold. And then he saw the chapel. The tower had changed. Its stone looked stretched, almost melted, as if heat had run through it, softening edges that had once stood firm. And along the upper arch, vines had begun to grow, but not from without. From within, pale tendrils, sickly green, pressed against the slats like fingers behind glass. The bell did not toll that hour, but Bram felt it, like breath on the back of his neck, like a voice murmuring just below the edge of hearing. He did not turn away. He stepped through the chapel doors. Inside, it smelled of smoke and lilac. Dust hung still in the air, unmoving. The pews had been moved, scattered, broken. The altar had collapsed, and in the center of the floor was a hole, circular, lined with stone. It descended into blackness, deeper than flame could reach. As he knelt beside the shaft, Bram pulled a candle from his coat and lit it. The flame flickered, then bent sharply left. There was wind, coming up from below, but the wind did not smell of earth or stone. It smelled of memory, the kind of memory that has no name, that swells suddenly when walking through a place once visited in childhood, or when hearing a song that has not been sung in 100 years. It was remembering, but not his own. The flame went out, and the bell began to toll again. The villagers heard it too. from their cottages and lofts and cellars. And this time, they did not cover their ears. They listened, because, this time, it called not in dread, but in longing. Old Erwin, who had not spoken in years, began to hum. The twins, who had not cried since birth, began to laugh. Ulrich fell to his knees and wept, whispering the name of his brother, who had died a decade before. The bell rang not as judgment, but as memory offering, not fear, but the promise of reunion. But Bram did not smile. He stood at the edge of the pit, and he understood. It was not offering memory. It was feeding. And now it had found enough. The bell was not accursed. It was a door, and something on the other side had just begun to knock. The chapel floor had not always been wood. Beneath the planks now rotted with damp, beneath the beams that had bowed with the weight of time, there had once been stone smooth and dark and cut with perfect precision. It was said the first builders found it already there, waiting, unmoving, unmarked by age or chisel. They had covered it quickly, not out of utility, but out of instinct. Even the masons would not speak of what they saw in the reflection of that stone when the light hit it just right. No records of that foundation remained, only the silence around it. Bram stood above the shaft, the candle gone cold in his fingers, his breath shallow against the stale air rising from below. Something ancient stirred in the deep, and not in fury, but in patience. Hunger, after all, does not need to rage. It simply waits for the hollow to grow wide enough. He lowered himself into the darkness. The rope he used had not been tested in years. It creaked as he descended, wood flaking from the edges of the opening above. The air thickened quickly, not with dust but with the press of memory. Others had gone before him. Their presence clung to the stones like condensation, neither warm nor cold, only still. The walls of the shaft were not earthen. They were lined with brick, some dry, some damp, some too smooth to have been fired by any village kill. Symbols had been carved into them, loops, circles, eyes, all shallow, all uneven, all etched by trembling hands. At 20 feet, he passed the first shelf, a narrow ledge, just wide enough for a single person to stand. Upon it rested a bell, not like the one above. This one was carved from wood, its clapper missing. Beside it lay a length of black cloth, folded and untouched by time. He did not pause. At 40 feet, a second ledge. This one held a bowl filled with what might once have been herbs. Their shape was unfamiliar, long-stemmed, silver-veined, curled in unnatural spirals. Bram smelled nothing, though the air around them pulsed faintly, as if the plants were still breathing, still waiting to be burned or buried. Deeper he went by. The time he reached the floor of the shaft, no light reached from above. He lit the second candle he'd packed, but its flame sputtered, dimmer than it should have been. The space before him stretched outward in a low corridor, stone-walled and bone-dry. The bell's song no longer pressed against his thoughts. Instead, there was only the rhythmic sound of dripping water. But from above, not below. And then a whisper, not words, not language, only a pattern. A sound that might have once been a lullaby or a chant. Something circular, repeating. Each repetition drew his breath slower. Each cycle made his pulse heavier, like his own blood had begun to remember something older than bone. The corridor opened into a chamber. Its shape was oval. Its walls curved inward like the inside of a great egg. The ground was carved in shallow terraces, spiraling toward the center, where a pedestal of white stone stood. Upon the pedestal rested the bell. Not a large thing, not imposing. Yet even in silence it commanded the space. Its surface was bone-colored, though metal in nature. Veins of something darker coursed through it, black or violet, or perhaps simply colorless, shifting with the candlelight. Symbols were carved along its rim, but not in any script Bram recognized. They moved faintly, as if written on water around the chamber. Remnants of offerings lay undisturbed. Teeth, feathers, dried fruit, carved stones, hair braided with copper thread. All laid carefully, reverently, in a pattern that echoed the spiral floor. Bram stepped forward. His feet did not echo. He reached the pedestal and paused. His hand hovered above the bell. He did not wish to touch it, yet felt as though he already had. Its surface shimmered faintly, not with heat, but with a kind of awareness. A presence, curled and still, like a cat at the end of a long sleep. Something watched him, not with eyes. Behind him, the corridor darkened. He turned, nothing moved. Yet he felt no longer alone. A figure stood halfway up the spiral path. Tall, hooded, cloaked in robes not stitched by any hand, its edges frayed into mist. No face, no movement, only presence. Bram stepped back, closer to the bell. The figure raised one arm, long and thin, and pointed downward toward the pedestal, not as warning, as invitation. The bell shivered, not a sound. Not quite, but the space around it changed. The air thickened. The candle flame twisted sideways, and the terraced floor began to pulse, as if some buried heart beneath the earth had started to beat. With each pulse, Bram saw visions, brief as blinks, struck the air around him. A girl, barefoot, running through fog with a bell clutched to her chest. A circle of stones collapsing inward. A chapel crumbling not with age, but with song. A hand his own ringing the bell. He stumbled back. The visions faded. The figure had vanished. The candle guttered above, in the village. The sky darkened, though the sun still stood. The people turned their heads eastward, and the children began to hum. All at once, in unison, a melody with no origin. They did not blink, they did not stop. In the forest, the birds fled once more, and from deep below the chapel floor, something began to rise. It did not crawl or climb. It unfolded, soundlessly, slowly, without mass, without form. A memory not born of any man. The bell did not toll. It no longer needed to. Its song now lived in the people, in the soil, in the spaces between silence. And the hollow began to forget what silence ever meant. The fog thickened, and something ancient smiled. Let your eyelids soften now, the weight of centuries settling around you like a soft cloak. What stirs beneath Black Hollow no longer slumbers. Its voice has taken root. Its bell no longer sings alone. You've felt it too, haven't you? Just at the edge of dreaming, where the hum begins. The song never stopped, though it no longer came from the bell. It hummed beneath the floorboards of the old chapel, beneath the cottages, beneath the roots of ash and elm. It moved in pulses, in breathless waves that made the mist curl and thicken, in strange rhythms, like the slow, uneven sigh of something sleeping far below and dreaming of light it had never seen. The children heard it most clearly, by the second day. They no longer spoke, not out of fear, not out of harm, but out of something gentler, eerier. They listened. They walked together in quiet rows, barefoot across the moss and cobbled stone. Heads tilted slightly, as if hearing something too beautiful to interrupt. They slept in circles. They dreamed with their eyes open. Their parents watched, unsure whether to be afraid or relieved. Some called it a blessing, others a curse. But all felt the same. Pull that strange tenderness in the chest when a melody, almost returns to the edge of memory, but never quite becomes real. The kind of music you remember from a dream and wake wishing you could hum. The fog did not lift, and time, in its usual way, became uncertain. The sun rose, and yet no shadows formed, no rooster crowed. The wind blew without sound. Even the river that ran through Black Hollow seemed to move slower, as if thickened by something unseen, in the chapel below. Bram had not slept. He sat beside the pedestal, the strange bell unmoved, untouched, its surface glimmering faintly beneath the flicker of his last candle. He no longer heard its voice, not as he had before. Now it moved through him not in words, but in pulses. Each breath he took echoed the rhythm beneath the floor. Each blink matched the spiral hum. His thoughts did not feel entirely his anymore, and he was not sure whether that frightened him. There was a comfort to the stillness. Not peace, no. Something older. A presence like the deep sea vast, unseen, and utterly indifferent to the ones who float on its surface. He had tried to climb back once. The rope had vanished. No draft stirred the shaft. No echo called down. Only the warm low sound of something enormous, shifting in a circle, endlessly, beneath the stone. And he knew, without knowing how, that he was not alone. They came not as people, Not exactly. They did not breathe, or speak, or move in ways eyes were built to follow. But they circled him sometimes, just outside the candlelight. Not hostile, not friendly, just present, like memories waiting to be remembered. He called them the echoed dot once. He spoke aloud, just to see if they would answer. "What do you want?" The air grew colder, not biting, but final, and in the silence that followed, he heard an answer. From them, but from within. "We want nothing. We wait." He did not speak again. Above in the hollow, the land had begun to change. Not quickly, not violently, but unmistakably. The trees had grown quiet. Not still, but quiet, branches moving without. Wind, leaves turning slowly inward. The animals had fled days before, even the strays. Moss grew in places it had never touched before, on walls, on roofs, on faces of old clocks. The roads softened underfoot, their stones loosening, as if the village itself had begun to forget it was ever meant to be traveled at the edge of the village. The ground opened, not suddenly, gradually, a widening depression near the roots of an old pine, one, long dead. Barkless and gray, standing like a sentinel. The soil pulled downward in slow spirals. No collapse, no sound, just a hush, like the world holding its breath, and then the bells returned, not 1, 3, low, high. Then deeper than hearing, they did not come from the chapel. They did not come from any tower at all. They came from below the earth, in waves that moved through bone, not air. They resonated with the blood, not the ears. And the villagers froze where they stood, caught between awe and terror. Some cried, some knelt, others simply lay down in the grass and closed their eyes, as though the sound had summoned them to sleep. Ellen's brother, who had not spoken since she vanished, began to whisper. "She's below," he said, again and again. "She's below, and she's listening." He was not wrong. Far beneath, Bram finally saw the door. It was not a door in any earthly sense. There was no wood, no hinges, no threshold. It was simply there, an arch of nothingness, framed in stone, behind the pedestal. No air passed through it, no light escaped. And yet it pulsed faintly, like a second heartbeat in the deep. The echoes stood around it, just visible now in the candlelight. Not fully formed, not flesh. Shadows shaped like people, or memories of people who had once stood here long ago and left only outline, some tall, some hunched, one with hair that moved as though underwater. None faced him directly, but all had turned toward the arch. The bell remained silent, but Bram could feel its attention shift. It no longer watched him, it watched the arch. He stepped forward, not knowing why. His feet moved of their own accord, slow and reverent, as if the path had been walked before and now remembered the weight of his tread. The closer he came, the less he felt himself. His name faded first, then the shape of his hands, the details of his past dimmed like stars before dawn. All that remained was a strange clarity that he had been meant to reach this place. Not because he was chosen, but because he had chosen. And in choosing, he had joined something that did not care for names or time or fate. The arch shimmered. Something moved behind it, not a shape, a shimmer, a ripple in reality itself, as if the fabric of what was real had grown thin, and something old had leaned its weight against it, pressing slowly forward. And then he saw her. Not Ellen, someone else, or something else. A woman, or the memory of one, cloaked in fog. Hair long, eyes closed, standing in the center of the spiral. Her hands held nothing, yet they moved in rhythm with the song the one no longer heard, only remembered. The moment he saw her, he understood. The bell had not been forged. It had been grown around her. She was its core, its voice, its keeper. She opened her eyes, and the arch bloomed, not with light, with memory, with the weight of every echo the bell had ever stolen, every whispered word, every forgotten face, every cry that had sunk into the earth and never risen again. They came flooding through, not in sound, but in sensation, the memory of being lost, the warmth of a mother's hand, the scream before drowning, the laughter of children around a fire, the feel of stone before a blade falls, the hush of a chapel before prayer. He fell to his knees, and door closed. The hollow did not sleep that night. No lamps were lit, no footsteps sounded, but in every home, in every cellar, barn, and attic, the people lay still, eyes closed, lips slightly parted, and hummed in unison. Not from fear, not from joy, from memory they had joined the song, and the bell, long silent, began to change. Its surface cracked gently, slowly, like a seed shell in spring, from within. Something warm glowed, the echo gathered, and beneath the chapel, the pedestal began to melt. Let your breath be slow, your thoughts weightless. Let the mist draw gently around you, like arms long forgotten. The bell no longer needs to toll. It is waking, and it remembers. Sleep now. The song will keep you. The bell was no longer a bell, not in the way one understands metal in shape and ringing. It had cracked gently, as if splitting along forgotten seams, but the sound that escaped was not sharp, was soft, almost sorrowful, like breath escaping from something that had held it in for too long. From within the crack, there came no light and no flame, but a slow, luminous fog that curled upward, coiling like smoke that remembered how to sing. The pedestal had melted, but not into liquid. Into memory, each stone had become a moment, each flake a whisper, crumbling into the earth with the weight of what had been forgotten. It did not vanish. It joined, and Bram knelt in the center of it all, unmoving, unblinking, not asleep and not awake. His breath locked in rhythm with something far beneath him, something so old that it no longer had a name. Only the hum of recognition, the woman, if she could be called, that stood across the chamber. She was neither alive nor dead. Her hair no longer moved, yet it shimmered faintly, like reeds under water. Her robes shifted without breeze, and her eyes, though open, seemed to look at nothing and everything all at once, as if she saw, not through vision, but through knowing. The echo circled her, and behind her, the stone arch remained, but changed it. Now bore carvings, freshly formed, not etched by hands but drawn into existence by presence alone. Spirals, loops, runes, each one humming faintly, with a language that could not be spoken aloud, without unraveling the mind that dared shape it. The chamber did not tremble. It pulsed, like a great lung, like a womb, like the silence before thunder. Above, in the village, the people no longer moved with purpose. They moved in patterns, slow, circular, dreamlike. They did not speak, but neither were they vacant. They hummed, still, in soft voices that did not rise or fall. Their songs matched the movements of their limbs. Children drew spirals in the dirt. Elders pressed moss into the cracks of their cottage walls. Bakers placed uncooked dough in wide circles upon stone floors, not knowing why, only knowing that it felt right. It had become a ritual, not given, not learned, remembered. The hollow had stopped living, and had begun listening. One house remained untouched, at the far edge of the hollow, near the rise where the old trees began. A small cottage stood in silence. No humming came from within, no windows lit, no footsteps stirred. Inside, a girl sat alone. Elen. She had not vanished. She had descended, and then returned, but not as she had been. Her eyes remained closed. Her hands rested in her lap. Her breath came slow, but her lips never parted. Around her, the walls of the cottage had grown strange. Moss lined the seams of the beams. Feathers hung from cords tied to the rafters. Water dripped from nowhere, and landed in bowls, arranged and perfect. Circles on the floor. She had not placed them. She had not moved since she returned. She sat, and breathed, and behind her eyelids, she saw what Bram saw. The woman beneath the chapel, the chamber, warm and dark as the inside of an ancient mouth. The bell, split open like a flower. And what lay within it? Not a creature, not a voice, a presence. A gathering. A thought too wide to belong to a single mind. It was not evil, it was not good. It simply was. It had waited for centuries, not in rage, but in hunger, not for flesh, but for remembrance. It had slept while generations forgot. And now it stirred, drawn upward by memory, fed by attention, echoing through voices that had unknowingly become vessels. It did not rise to conquer, it rose to be. Known, Bram stood, not because he chose to, because it was time. The pedestal no longer existed, only the open space where it had stood. The cracked bell, glowing softly from within, floated inches above the ground, spinning in slow circles. It did not hum, it did not ring. But the spiral beneath it had begun to rotate stone, sliding against stone in silence. The woman did not speak. She raised her hand, and the spiral stopped. From the bell's core, something reached out, not a limb, not light, a thread of fog, fine and gold like a strand of spider silk. It stretched forward, impossibly long, impossibly thin, and touched Bram's chest. He did not move, he did not breathe. His body softened not in pain, but in forgetting. His skin paled. His eyes dimmed, but his presence deepened. He became lighter and heavier, as if he were no longer entirely here, nor entirely gone. The fog pulled him forward, step by step, into the heart of the spiral, and as he reached the center, the chamber opened, not with walls, with sky. He was standing in the hollow once more, but not the hollow he knew. It was older, the trees were younger, taller. The village was not yet built. The river ran straight, and in the center of it all, where the chapel would one day rise, stood a circle of stone. The bell stood at its heart, and the people gathered, dozens of them, cloaked, silent, reverent. Each stood in a spiral. Each held a thread. Each thread led to the bell. The ceremony was not spoken, it was lived, and Bram was one of them. When he awoke, he was back in the chamber. The bell hovered still. The woman was gone. The arch was sealed, but the fog within him remained, and he understood. The bell had never been cursed. It had been buried, because the world had forgotten how to listen. It was not a warning, it was a calling, a beacon not to danger, but to truth too heavy for the waking world. He looked upward. The shaft, once dark and narrow, now glowed faintly with golden fog. It no longer rose, it unfolded, and he walked toward it, not climbing, not crawling, simply ascending, as though memory had decided he was ready to return. In the village, people began to stir. The humming faded, children blinked, mothers wept, fathers held their sons. The dream had ended, but its shape remained. The roads were still soft. The stones still sang beneath the soil, and the trees leaned slightly toward the chapel, as if listening still. Ellen opened her eyes and spoke. "He's coming." They did not ask who. They simply gathered and waited, as they had before, as they would again. Sleep now. Let the song carry you down beneath the roots, where silence remembers how to breathe. The bell is no longer silent. Its song has found you, and in dreams you will remember. The spiral, the fog, the hum, and the waiting that never ends. No footsteps echoed as Bram returned. No wind moved the grass. No voice greeted him when he stepped once more into the hollow. And yet everything had changed. The chapel no longer stood empty. Its door was open, though no hand had touched it. Its windows glowed faintly, though no candle burned. Ivy now clung to its stone, not like a parasite, but like a shroud, and on its steeple, where once no bell had hung for 100 years or more, the faint outline of a bell could now be seen translucent, golden, humming without movement, swaying though no breeze passed. Bram stood before it and felt nothing. No fear, no warmth, no purpose, only the strange weight of return. Behind him, the villagers had begun to gather, not in panic, not in confusion. They came slowly, barefoot through the soft grass, eyes quiet, hands open at their sides. Their clothes were plain, their faces calm. There were no shouts, no questions, no greetings. They simply came, one by one, as if drawn by gravity, as if every path in the village led only here now. Ellen stood among them. Her face held no child's uncertainty. She watched Bram with eyes that saw further than the hilltops, deeper than the riverbed, wider than the sky. And when he stepped aside, she stepped forward. No one stopped her, not even him. Inside, the chapel no longer held pews or altar. The wood had melted to moss. The stone had softened to soil. The floor was damp, rich with roots and fallen petals that had never bloomed above ground. The spiral remained, etched gently into the ground, now traced with threads of golden mist that shimmered like dew. The bell hovered at its center. Not the cracked bell, another new and yet impossibly old, not forged, remembered, as if the hollow itself had dreamed it back into being. It did not ring it, med, not with sound, but with waiting. Ellen stepped into the spiral, and the spiral answered. Each step she took bloomed, not with flowers, with memory. Tiny, flickering visions blossomed beneath her feet, glimpses no longer than a breath. A woman bending to draw water at dawn, her eyes bright with laughter. A man alone at a desk, fingers blackened by ink, whispering words into parchment. A child chasing fireflies beneath an unfamiliar moon. An old couple holding hands, seated beneath a tree that no longer stands. Each memory rose like mist and vanished before it could be claimed. Ellen did not pause. She walked until she stood before the bell. She placed her hand upon it, and the hollow breathed in. The sky changed. Clouds, thick and unmoving, spread like frost across the heavens. The sun dimmed, not hidden, but softened as if filtered through centuries of forgetting. A hush settled over the land. Birds did not fly. Leaves did not fall. The river ceased its ripple, and in every home, every barn, every cellar, the people of Black Hollow knelt, not in fear, in reverence. They did not know why. They simply did. And beneath the chapel, in the spiral chamber where once Bram had wandered alone, something stirred. Not a presence, a place, a vault of memory, vast and wild, began to open slowly, gently, like eyelids fluttering at the edge of waking. And within it, the truth. The hollow had never been cursed. It had been chosen, not by gods, not by fate, by memory itself. In ages before stone had names, before rivers had banks, before the sky learned to turn blue, the land had been a keeper, a cradle, for knowing too deep to be carried in minds. It had gathered, it had listened, and it had buried not to hide, to protect every sorrow, every joy, every word too soft to be remembered by books, every glance, every grief, every small, sacred thing. Humans forgot. They drifted down into the hollow. The bell was not a warning. It was a beacon, not to draw attention, to offer return. And Ellen, she was the key, not a chosen one, not a prophet, a match. The echo that fit the resonance. She did not speak. She did not move. She became still, utterly and wholly still. And the bell opened, not split, not shattered. It unfolded, like a cocoon split along ancient seams, like a flower blooming in moonlight, like a thought long buried finding its voice again. And from within, the hum became words, not in the air. In the mind, you have returned. No lips moved, no wind carried it. But every villager heard it. In the marrow of their bones, in the backs of their eyes. Bram knelt. Ellen closed her eyes. The sky deepened to a dusk that never arrived, and the bell golden, warm, weightless, higher, until it touched the very point where chapel roof met mist. And from its center, the light emerged, not bright, soft, the color of memory, of paper yellowed, with time, of skin touched by candlelight. It moved like smoke, and silk, and warmth. It wrapped the chapel, it wrapped the people, it wrapped the hollow, and it whispered, "You have remembered, so we may remain." Outside the chapel, the trees had bowed. The earth had quieted. No more humming came from the people. No more ritual. No more dreams. Only breath. Only stillness. Only return. The hollow had become itself again, and the bell, no longer hidden, no longer cracked, remained suspended above the chapel. Pulsing faintly, it would never ring. It did not need to. It was no longer waiting. It had been heard, and that was enough. Bram stayed not as guardian, not as witness. He simply stayed, because once the bell had remembered him, he could not forget it. He tended the chapel, though it no longer needed tending. He walked the spiral, though it no longer asked. He listened, because in the hollow, listening had become sacred, and listening was all that remained. Sleep. Now let your breath fall in rhythm with the old spirals. Let the mist curl gently around your ribs. The bell is quiet now, not because it is gone, but because you carry its song. And in dreams, it will hum, not to haunt you. To remind you, you were here, you listened, and you remembered. It is said that the land forgets nothing. Long after names fade from stone, after wood rots and iron rusts, after voices fall still and lines of blood vanish into dust, the soil remembers, not in words, in rhythm, in pulse, in feeling, like the echo of something never spoken aloud, humming softly beneath the moss and root. And so it was in the hollow. Even as the world beyond spun forward in its noisy forgetting wars begun. Cities risen, oceans crossed, and cut the hollow remained, untroubled, unspeaking, and unchanged. Days moved in a softened spiral. Seasons passed like pages left half-freed. Time, as others knew it, had loosened its grip. The villagers did not notice, not in the way people notice, the weather or the shape of a cloud. They simply adapted. They slept longer, spoke softer, moved with the weight of those who carried something, sacred but unnamed. Children were born with wide eyes. Elders no longer feared the end, and the bell still hovering, still glowing above the chapel, no longer drew attention. Because no one needed to look. They felt it always there, always humming, just beyond sound, a presence that filled the bones with warmth and the dreams with color. It had no need to ring, it was already heard, deep beneath the chapel. In the spiral chamber, the stone had begun to shift, not to collapse, to transform. The spiral had widened. Its etchings now glowed faintly, not with light, but with memory. Images moved along the stone fleeting, fluid, like reflections caught in a stream. They showed not visions of gods or monsters, no prophecies, no doom. Only life, moments to mother, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. A man, burying, his hands in warm soil at dawn. A child laughing at the shape of a cloud. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand, only the sacred smallness of being. The chamber had become a Vessela sanctum, not to worship something, higher to hold something deeper. The remembering, Ellen remained, unchanged, yet she was no longer the girl they had known. She still wandered the hollow, barefoot, soft-spoken, eyes distant. But wherever she went, the air grew stiller, the shadows gentler. Dogs stopped barking. Fires flickered in perfect circles. She was not feared. She was not followed. She was simply felt, as if she had become a seam in the world. Quiet place where things once lost could be found again. Children called her the bell's sister. Old women left sprigs of rosemary on her doorstep, though she never asked. And at night, she walked alone to the chapel and stood beneath the glowing bell, not to pray, to listen. And she would whisper nothing, and the bell would respond with silence, and that was enough. Elsewhere, far beyond the hollow's misted hills, the world began to turn its gaze inward. Unrest stirred in kingdoms built on forgetting. Scholars dreamed of lost cities. Pilgrims walked roads they could not name. And somewhere, in a distant cathedral, a choir sang a note that had not been written, could not be traced to any known key but which filled every corner with warmth, and brought tears to those who heard it. They called it the hollow note, but they did not know why. The sound echoed far longer than it should have, long enough to be remembered, long enough to become something more, a pull, a call, a resonance that could not be denied. And those who followed it found their feet turning, toward the hills, toward the mist, toward the land without signs, where maps ran dry and stories whispered from the trees. The hollow had begun to awaken. More than memory, it was drawing the forgotten home. The first stranger arrived at dusk, not a man of war or wealth, a quiet woman, pale-haired, cloaked in linen, worn thin by years of travel. She did not speak when she crossed the threshold. She simply paused, removed her boots, and stepped barefoot into the hollow. The mist parted. The people watched, not with suspicion, with knowing. She was welcomed not with words, but with nods. A bowl of stew placed before her. A bed of moss prepared beside the hearth. She wept, not for sadness, for relief. She had followed the sound in her dreams, and now, For the first time in years, she felt it outside herself. The hum, the warmth, the slow pulsing presence that had waited, not to be understood, but to be joined. And that night, she stood beside Ellen, beneath the bell, and said nothing, and listened, and the bell knew her, and she was remembered. Others came one by one, never in groups, never expected. They arrived barefoot, empty-handed, eyes wide with that same faraway wonder. A carpenter who no longer remembered the sound of his own voice. A girl who had never spoken, but whose drawings pulsed with strange geometries. A man who carried a rusted compass that spun wildly unless he held his breath. Each found their way into the hollow. Each found silence. Each remembered, and the hollow made room not by expanding, but by folding, like paper made into a crane, like breath held just long enough to become a sigh. The spiral grew, the people slowed, and the mist grew thicker not as fog, but as presence. It was no longer hiding them, it was holding them. The hollow had become a cradle, and the bell a heartbeat. One evening, as the first frost kissed the edge of autumn, Bram stood in the chapel again. He was older now, his beard full, his shoulders bowed slightly, but his eyes steady. He looked at Ellen, who still seemed as ageless as the mist. And she looked at him, and for the first time in many seasons, they spoke, only once. Only softly, he asked, "Is it done?" And she smiled, not with her lips, but with her presence, and said, "It has only just begun." He did not need to ask more. He stepped back into the spiral, and lay down, and slept not to die, to remember far beneath the hollow. Beneath the chamber, beneath the stone, the earth had grown warm, not hot, not cracked. Warm, like a hearth, long tended, warm, like breath. And in that warmth, something pulsed. Not a creature, not a god, a presence made of all the quiet things that had ever been lost, a child's name forgotten too soon, a lullaby no one remembered how to sing, a hand held once in a dream. It pulsed, and it waited, and it whispered, without words, the only truth it ever needed to speak. You are not forgotten, so rest now. Dear listener, let your breath match the hum of the bell. Let your thoughts fall gently, like leaves curling into soil. You are part of the spiral now. You have always been. And in dreams, the mist will find you, not to lead you astray, to lead you home. The first snow fell without warning, no flurry, no storm. It drifted from a sky, to still to carry weather, landing in gentle flakes upon rooftops, upon moss, upon skin, and disappearing before it could settle. It was not winter's snow, nor the kind that weighed branches or silenced birds. It was thinner than breath snow, that had not fallen in centuries, or perhaps had never fallen before at all. And when it touched the bell, it did not melt. It shimmered, and for the first time since, the golden bell had unfolded itself to the hollow. It moved, not with sound. With memory, it rotated once, slowly, so slowly. It might have taken 1,000 heartbeats, and then stopped. The people did not stir. They had no need to witness. They had already felt it in their sleep. Their dreams shifted. They dreamed of things they'd never known. A man dreamt of holding his mother's hand, though he'd never met her. A woman saw the shape of her name in a language she'd never spoken. A child dreamed of stars, not the ones above, but stars beneath her feet, twinkling in a spiral carved of stone and across the hollow. Every lantern went out at once, not in fear, in reverence. The remembering had deepened, far beneath the chapel, beneath the chamber of the spiral and the light. Another space had emerged. No hand had carved it, no map had traced it. It simply was a hollow within the hollow, a place so quiet that even silence did not linger there, and in it stood a door. No frame, no handle, no hinges, just an outline, faint and pulsing, like a thought not yet formed. It had not opened. It had not been opened. It was opening very slowly. With each breath, the hollow exhaled. It did not lead elsewhere. It led inward. Ellen stood at the edge of that unseen threshold, not waiting, not fearing, only listening. The mist had wrapped her like cloth, woven not of weather, but of time. She saw the door not with her eyes, but with her knowing, and in the quiet, something spoke not with voice, but with presence. Not a being, not a god, something older. "Are you ready?" She did not answer. She bowed her head, and that was enough. The door grew clearer, and the hollow held its breath. Elsewhere, the villagers stirred, not awake, not asleep. They moved in ways that made no sound, drifting across snowless paths, tracing spirals into frost, humming songs no one had taught them. They were not possessed. They were not bewitched. They were remembering, as though the hollow had seeped into their blood. They did not speak. Speech was no longer needed. What they had once tried to say in words was now said in silence. And in that silence, something bloomed. Not flowers, not light. A presence, a sense of being held, of being seen, of being known. And for the first time since the golden bell had returned, the hollow dreamed. Its dream was not linear, not a story, a pattern, swirling and recursive. Without center or edge, the dream wove through the stones and roots, through the sleeping and the waking, through Ellen's eyes and Bram's breath, through the snow that never stayed and the light that never dimmed. And in the dream, something moved through the hollow that was not human, not spirit, not weather, a shape, like a woman, but not like a song made flesh. Her skin shimmered with constellations. Her hair flowed like river mist. Her feet left no trace. Yet flowers bloomed behind her. She did not speak. She sang without sound. She passed through the homes, through the spiral, through the chapel, and beneath the bell, she paused, and in her presence, the bell turned once more. Not a full rotation, only enough for every sleeper to inhale at once, enough for every animal to pause its breath, enough for the hollow to remember a piece of itself, long buried. The shape smiled, and was gone, but her presence lingered, woven now into the mist, into the snow, into the golden shimmer that hovered where moonlight used to be. And then the door opened. No creak, no flare, no boundary broken. It simply was no longer closed, and from its center, a figure stepped forth. Not Ellen. Not entirely. She looked the same, she moved the same, but something had shifted. She had gone somewhere, without leaving, and returned carrying something weightless and ancient. Not knowledge, not prophecy, only stillness, stillness. That echoed. She stepped onto the spiral chamber floor, and every etching lit at once, not with fire, not with glow, with recognition, as if the spiral had finally completed its breath and exhaled her. The villagers came. Again, without call, without sound. They gathered in a circle around the chapel, eyes closed, hands joined, and for the first time, the bell rang. Once, not loud, not long, but deep. So deep it seemed to come, not from the bell, but from the bones. It passed through them, it passed through the hollow. It passed through every tree, every stone, every fold in the earth, and then it passed beyond to the edges of where memory touches dream, to the place where the forgotten waits to be welcomed home. It was not a warning, it was not a toll, it was a greeting. That night, the snow fell again. This time, it stayed, but not cold, warm snow, soft as breath, heavy with light. It blanketed the hollow in silence. Not death, peace. Peace that could only come after long listening, after deep remembering, and the people slept, not out of weariness, out of return. So breathe now, let the snow fall behind your eyelids, let the bell hum beneath your ribs. The hollow is quiet. The door has opened, and somewhere, in the place between mist and memory, something has remembered you, and that is enough. There was a morning when no one stirred, not out of fear, not out of sleep, but because the hollow itself had settled. Every branch held its breath. Every hearth burned low and steady. Every window glowed with quiet, golden calm. The mist, usually shifting and breathing in waves, had become still. Not frozen, just present, full, as if it no longer needed to move, as if it had found its shape, and in the sky above, the clouds had parted, not in streaks or storms, but in slow concentric circles, mirroring the spiral beneath the earth. A single soft ray of light drifted down and rested gently atop the golden bell. now hovering a little lower than before, as if bowing in gratitude. It did not chime again. It no longer needed to. The sound had already passed through everything now. Came the quiet after song. Bram rose from his mat with no pain in his joints. He walked barefoot to the chapel. Though frost still lingered along the stone, he did not shiver. The cold no longer bit him. It welcomed him. His fingers brushed the chapel door, and it swung open with no sound. Inside, he found Ellen waiting. She had not aged. She had not changed, and yet her eyes held something they hadn't before. Not sorrow, not joy, a deep, abiding completeness, as though every note in the song had been sung. They said no words. There were none left to say. He walked beside her. To the spiral they stood at its center, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to dissolve. Not into light, not into mist, into presence, into memory, into the very rhythm of the hollow, and where they had stood. The stone glowed for a moment, then quieted. Outside, the people gathered one last time, not as a ceremony, not as a farewell, just a standing dot. Together each person held a single thread, spun from linen, moss, ash, snow, and silence. Threads that had appeared overnight beside their beds, warm to the touch and pulsing faintly with golden light. Without instruction, they tied their threads into a single spiral upon the chapel floor. No beginning, no end. And then they stepped back. Leaving it there, the youngest child placed a pine cone in its center. The oldest villager closed her eyes and whispered a single word. No one heard, and all of them understood. Then they went home. Their homes, once crooked and weather-worn, seemed brighter now, not from sun, from stillness. The kind of stillness that lingers long after the last pages turned. The hollow had finished its remembering. Now it would simply be. The bell remained above the chapel, still, golden, still glowing, still humming, but only for those who knew how to listen. Birds nested in its curve. Children played beneath its shadow, and sometimes, on winter nights, a traveler would arrive, lost, weary, hollowed by the world. They would be welcomed in silence, given warm bread, a moss bed, a listening ear, and the next morning, they would remember something they hadn't known they'd forgotten. A song their mother sang, the way the stars looked when they were 10, the feeling of being held, once, long ago. And then they would cry, not from grief, from return, in time. The mist grew gentler. The seasons came and went without fear. The spiral chamber was left untouched, never sealed, never entered, as if it had become part of something deeper than stone. And the hollow, once cursed, once forgotten, once feared, became a place known only in stories, whispered by firesides, tales of a bell that could sing without sound, of a girl who walked barefoot through dreams, of a place where you could hear your own soul echo if you stood still long enough. No maps showed it, no signs led there, and yet, sometimes, in the hush between dusk and sleep, a quiet pulse could be felt beneath your feet. Soft, steady, patient, the hollow was still there, not needing to be found, only needing to be remembered. So now, dear listener, close your eyes, let the spiral hold you. Let the bell hum within your chest. Let every sorrow soften into stillness. You have walked the path, you have heard the silence, you have remembered, and now you may rest. For the hollow remembers you, and that is forever enough.